Welcome everybody to the Fripp VT user group. And anything that you hear that you want to tweet, use hashtag FrippVT. You are in for a treat. Our last meeting on captivating virtual presentations was so popular, we had so many questions that this is part 2, and we have opened it up to other friends of Fripp who were on that one, just to answer some of the questions that we had left over, because we naturally wanted to. Okay, well, sorry about that. You have more than one Fripp. The world only needs one Fripp when you can have me virtually. So what we're going to do is start with a quick update, refresher from Tom Drews, who you will remember is our expert on captivating virtual presentations. We've also invited another special guest, which is Jim Prost, who designs all my PowerPoints and can answer some of your specific questions on PowerPoint. As you know, our super admin, as usual, is Paul, and he will keep us on track. So, Paul, will you tell everybody how they can interact with us?
Absolutely. On the right-hand side of your screen, you will see a chat window, which you should be open now. If you have any short, specific questions, please enter those questions into the chat window of a comment. Also, there will be polls throughout the call. You can click, they will pop up automatically. You can click on yes or no and then vote. And then to return to the chat menu, just click the chat tab again.
All right, and just to get everybody involved, why don't we start with our first polling question, which is so easy, just so that you can see how to do that. And the first question is, are you experienced in presenting online? Your options are yes or no, and you will see the poll pop up on the right-hand screen, and you will have up to 1 minute to answer. But I would think that would be one you could do in 20 seconds, as long as you find the right place. And while we're waiting for you to do that, we will give the polls. Let me remind you a little about Tom Drews. Tom has been hired by WebEx and Citrus, all the companies that present online. He is hired not only to train their staff, also their customers. He's not only an expert in captivating virtual presentations, he's also an expert in making minutes. His company is whatworks.biz. So let's see, do we have any, have our attendees voted yet, Paul?
We are almost at the end. We have about 20 more seconds to go until the end of the polling.
Okay, so it's yes or no, and then you vote. Jim Prost, and many of you, when you've seen me present live, have always been impressed with my PowerPoint, and that's all thanks to Jim. So he will say a few comments and answer any of your questions. Well, this is very interesting. 69% of you are experienced presenting online and 31% not. So that's very good. And one of your missions, Tom, is to not only remind our experts how to do it better, also get the people who are not experienced, give them the confidence of presenting online. So, Tom, would you like to start with a review of what you presented, just the highlights from our last session?
Absolutely. First of all, I want to say hello, everyone, and it's great to see you again, assuming that this is your second time here. And just to be extra sure, are you able to see me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. I am going to open up my presentation here, and now you should be able to see my presentation, correct?
Absolutely.
Excellent. Hello again, everyone. Welcome to How to Design and Deliver Captivating Virtual Presentations. My goal is to make it through this in about 5 minutes and 30 seconds, but it should provide you with a nice review of what we covered during our first session. Presenting in the virtual environment is the wave of the future. It'll never replace the face-to-face meeting, which is something we've been doing for centuries, but it can be an incredibly effective means of communicating our message and our value. That said, it means next to nothing if we can't effectively engage them. And it turns out that is the #1 challenge that we're facing when we're presenting online. I just want to make sure that we've got the slides are catching up here. Let's see here. Paul, just to be sure, are you seeing engage on your screen?
Yes, I am.
Okay, great. So that's our biggest challenge when we're presenting online, and if we can't get the attention of our audience, they are likely to wander, and in a worst case scenario, this is going to happen. And of course, that's what we want to avoid, is having people fall asleep. That's, of course, why I'm here and sharing with you 10 of my favorite best practices for presenting online and engaging our audience. #1 is to find the right platform. I mentioned in our first session that I have a WebEx account and a GoToWebinar account for my own personal reasons. They serve all my purposes up to 1,000 people. If you want to go higher, then Webinar Jam is certainly one of those options. #2 is to deliver value. I know this sounds painfully obvious for most of you, but this is the #1 strategy for engaging an audience, in my opinion, especially in the virtual environment. It's not what we think is most important, though. It's what our audience thinks is most important, and the only way to know that is to actually ask questions of our audience. I personally like to get on the phone ahead of time and ask my audience what's of interest to them, what are their challenges, and if I don't have that option, then I will pull a slide up like this in the very beginning of my presentation and ask people to type their response into the chat room. Great way to find out what's important to our audience. #3 is to have a structure. Patricia will be sharing her structure, which is very similar to mine, and there's a reason for that. She had a very strong influence in my world of presentation skills. The most important thing I want to mention here, or point I want to mention, is to not start with an agenda, to start with a grabber opening, something to get the attention of the audience right from the start. And to not end on questions, but to end on a closing grabber. Again, something to leave your audience with that they won't forget. #4 is to add some Hollywood. An Academy Award-winning film is basically thousands of images that are strung together to tell a story. I believe we can do something very similar with our virtual presentations and take advantage of all of the different visuals we have to work with. Live video, recorded video, photos, graphics, multimedia, and anything else that will engage our audience visually. #5 is to keep it simple. How long would it take you to read this slide? Most people say 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes. It's too long, I don't want to read it. Unfortunately, this is the majority of the presentations that I see, and probably Patricia and Jim as well. It's going to be a huge distraction for you to be reading this while I'm talking. So here are 3 great options, one of which is to use a build where you bring in 1 point at a time, simplify your text, speak to it, bring it in the next point, and so on. That way our audience is not reading ahead. #2 is to break each of these points into separate slides, add an interesting photo or visual, and then finally is to use the annotation tools. Many of the platforms that we work with, the web conferencing platforms, provide us with annotation tools so we can draw attention to what we want people to see. This is if we don't have the luxury of simplifying our slides. Our goal is to avoid death by PowerPoint, and a great way to do that is to use photos to help illustrate our point. #6 is to learn from the masters. The first master to learn from, of course, is Patricia Fripp, and if you haven't checked out frippvt.com, I strongly encourage it. The other master I wanted to mention is Steve Jobs. He left behind a legacy of presentation mastery. So I've included some slides here. You'll notice that You won't find more than 3 or 4 words on any of his slides. This allows him to focus his audience specifically on the message that he has to communicate. Number 7 is to use the web camera. Here is what you don't want to do, and that is to have poor lighting, messy background, weak appearance, no eye communication. This is slightly better here, where you see a messy background, but everything else is looking good. And you can see what a background will do to distract your audience. You can see the bananas in the back there. This is a much better scenario. Still, we're missing eye communication. What we want to do is look directly into the camera. And now we are in great shape. Number 8 is to make the most of your voice. When we're presenting in person, we have eye communication, facial expressions, gestures, body movement to work with. But when we're presenting online, all we have to work with is our voice and what our audience sees visually. So we absolutely have to make the most of our voice. The 3 most important elements, in my opinion, would be volume, pace, and articulation. This is especially important when we're presenting to a global audience. Number 9 is to avoid technology disasters. I have literally experienced pretty much every one there is. Use a wired connection. I would recommend using 2 computers, not 2 monitors, but 2 computers. Have them each logged in, one as the presenter, one as the participant. And then finally is start your meeting early. Number 10, and the final point here, is to know your platform well. And as you see here again, these are the 2 platforms that I use. I will use a variety of platforms if I'm working with other people. During the last few days, I've become much more familiar with Webinar Jam, which seems to be a great platform as well. Bottom line, most important here is to practice. To practice, practice, practice. Log in a second computer as a participant. Deliver a presentation to yourself. Work with all the different tools. See how they come across. And I think you will be in great shape for your next virtual presentation. As a reminder, this is my business, whatworks.biz. You can take a look there if you're interested in this. And also, these are the resources that I promised. If you didn't write those down before, you certainly can do that now. And finally, I wanted to let you know about a webinar that I'm delivering tomorrow. Just in case this is of interest, you can see me in action delivering a webinar using GoToWebinar. We have over 200 registrations right now, so it'll be an opportunity for you to see how I interact with the group, and just in case this is something that would be of interest to you. Go to makingminutes.com and you can sign up for it. Presenting online is the wave of the future, but it means nothing if we cannot engage our audience. So if you take advantage of everything that we covered in the last 5 minutes, literally, if you practice that, I guarantee you would be in the top 1% of virtual presenters in the world, because just about no one is practicing this. Thank you very much for the time there, and I will now pass it back to Patricia.
Well, thank you very much, and may I emphasize what Tom said and the mistake that I made. Although we do have a comment that one of our wonderful participants said, oh, 2 Fripps is better than the price of 1. What I did was tune in, as Tom suggests, as a participant, so that when I'm not looking at you, I could see what's going on in the screen. My problem was I didn't turn my speakers down, because I only want to see what's going on as much. I don't need to hear. So that was my mistake. Now you'll notice, very much as in a real-life presentation, if it doesn't bother the presenter when something goes wrong or you make a mistake, they won't be bothered, because I am assuming that you have a certain empathy for presenters. And when you know in the virtual world, things can go wrong. Now, we are lucky to have Terry Brock tuned into our meeting. Terry is the expert who taught me the webinar jam and the Google meeting. And as Tom says, you have to practice. Jim and Tom and I practiced on Sunday and Monday. We tune in early, and it's amazing. It doesn't matter how often you go back and forth. There are many times you forget simple basics that you knew last time. So rehearse, rehearse, practice, practice, practice. And as Terry Brock, who's the expert, Terry's been presenting online when the rest of us were working out how do we use email. And what Terry says, and it's so true, and I know Tom will reinforce this, the reason people don't engage online is because something goes wrong once. Well, it's like anything else. You have to get back and get over it. There are 3 types of speakers in live presentations: those who have bombed, those who will bomb, and those who will bomb again. So perhaps, Tom, we could say that might be true. People who have had problems, will have problems, and likely to have problems again. So, Tom, if you would like to come back so we can see you, and I'll ask a couple of questions. Some I will answer myself. A couple we might have answered last time. We printed out all the notes from the last session. One from Ray: what is the best length of time for virtual presentations? That was a question we made comments last time, but can you pick that up again?
Absolutely. My first thought on that is that presenting online is much more challenging than presenting in person as far as getting the attention of the audience and holding the attention of the audience. That is without a question harder to do in this environment, so shorter is better. I think 30 to 60 minutes is a great range. Nowadays, I've heard more and more that people are delivering webinars for 35 minutes and 45 minutes. An hour actually seems long.
Yeah.
Now, that said, I have actually delivered training programs, many for 3 hours, that are 3 hours long. So you want to make sure you have a 20-minute break in there, and be sure to practice everything that you learn in this sort of a program, because it's challenging to hold their attention for 3 hours.
All right, good. Now, the very first question we had in last time, which I hope we modeled the answer even though we didn't answer it, and that came from Miguel, who wanted to know, if you're delivering a virtual presentation and you want to promote materials, which of course we are delivering free content, we're going to tell you how you can engage with us more. The idea, the same as with real life, if you do not give real information that is valuable to individuals, they're either going to leave the room or tune out of your virtual meeting. The value comes before you make any offering or direct them anywhere else. Do you have any more comments on that, Tom?
The only comment that I would add is one strategy to keep your audience sticking around for the duration of your event is to mention in the very beginning what resources you might share with them afterwards. So oftentimes I'll have 3 or 4 different documents that I like people to access, so I'll mention it in the beginning, pull up a visual, and then say, please stick around to the very end and we'll show you how you can get this. That way people won't wander off in the middle of it.
And I noticed you did that last time, so that was very good. Now let's bring in Jim Prost, because one of the questions was, and this came from, let's see, I'm just trying to see who it came from, but the question was, can you do builds, or one, what are builds? And then while you are answering that, Jim, I'll get ready to demonstrate a build. So Jim Prost, take it away.
Thank you, Patricia. A build is what happens on a slide. A transition is what happens between slides. So a lot of us have seen builds with fly-ins and things like that. I have, especially with Patricia and any of my clients, have gotten away from the fancy items coming into the screen and really just gone to an appear. And Patricia's going to show a slide that will show the build. And part of this is leading your audience through the story. So Patricia, if you can show the slide.
Yes.
There we go.
Can you see that now, Paul?
Yes.
Perfect. Now, this short segment are a few slides from my how to design a presentation program, and we start with what is a premise formula. And as you can see, I bring in an idea and I'm explaining that although this does not make sense until I explain it, I want to keep them engaged. So every ... means we're going to fill in a blank. Can, the subject of your talk, or the result, how, and your points of wisdom. And what I'm suggesting, even if we deliver the same type of program to a different audience, it's always a good idea to fill in the premise formula. So, for example, every VT user can deliver more captivating virtual presentations. How? By your points of wisdom are the talking points. Now, once in a while, you're going to talk about the result rather than the topic. For example, as we have quite a few sign-ins and registrations from our friends at the American Payroll Association who deliver superb virtual presentations because they've been trained by Tom. And you always notice the people who have skills at a high level are always looking to see if they can learn something else. So at their APA Congress, every year I present a seminar on how to design or how to sell yourself and your ideas to your senior management. So the premise could be every payroll manager can sell themselves and their ideas to their senior management. How? That's what we're talking about in the seminar. Or it could be every payroll manager can get promoted. Oh, that's what I want to do. How do I do that? By learning to sell yourself and your ideas to your senior management. So it's, are you selling the subject or the result of your subject? That's up to you. Now, in any presentation, there are three important ingredients. There is the content, what it is you're actually going to talk about. Then there is the structure. The structure is how you organize your remarks so it's easy for you to remember and easy for your audience to remember. I consider the speech structure the skeleton under the flesh of your words. And when you have a good structure, now something's a little strange here, it is easier for you to deliver your content. Now, can you see I have two slides on top of each other here, Paul?
I see strong opening the audience.
Can you not see the last slide underneath?
No.
Well, then don't. Good. So, and what we are demonstrating here, of course, is the bills. How you present information in a way that you can talk about it without confusing everybody. So this is, as I say, what we are demonstrating is not so much the content as what is a build. You bring in one idea at a time to focus attention and then give the next part of the formula. And this is, we talk about visual shorthand, how you can give more information than the amount of words that you are using. So now let me come back to my PowerPoint. Now, can you see me now, Paul?
Yes, I can.
Perfect. Now, one thing I learned from Terry Brock as well, it's great to have visuals. However, it's more fun often to cut it up and have people talking to you. So why don't we go back to the questions? Now you know what a build is. And Tom and Jim, you can answer these questions as you wish. Now, Sims wanted to know, is it possible to read your speaker notes that appear under a slide without the audience seeing the notes in the virtual presentation? Tom?
I do not believe so, at least with the platforms that I have used personally. Jim might have a different take on that. But what I do know is in WebEx, and this is one reason why I like to use WebEx, is it has some extra tools, is you are able to see your PowerPoint notes while you're actually in the WebEx meeting. That only works if you have a PC, not a Mac. What I will do in pretty much every other situation, though, if I don't have that option, is either have a second computer set up where I can view the slides with the notes, or I will print out a document with notes so that I can reference it in front of me. So I'll always have my notes if necessary. And as Patricia will tell you, probably the best solution is to know your material so well that you don't need your notes.
Exactly. And what I have a tendency to do, I will actually print out 9 slides a page, and I will tape them to my second monitor next to me. Now, Jim, would you like to make some comments about the best way to use notes with your slides when you're doing a live presentation?
Okay, be happy to do that. Before I do that, I want to mention it might be possible, and I'll tell you what, I'll attempt to do this with WebEx. It might be possible to set PowerPoint up into presenter view so you would see the notes and the slide, but I'll check that out and get back to you on that. There is a piece in PowerPoint called View, and if you come down to Notes, you would see your slide at the top with your notes below that. So in a live presentation, I use this frequently if I'm using new material, so I'm able to read my notes. But the other piece here that we keep reinforcing is engaging the audience, getting their attention. Looking at your notes turns them off. So as best you can, as both Tom and Patricia said, try not to use notes.
And if you want to tweet something, and this is a great principle, it is better to be personable than perfect. Hashtag FrippVT. And I have to add the hashtag because Melanie, who is my director of social media, makes sure that I keep honest and keep saying hashtag FrippVT. Good. Next question, and this came from Cherie. If you have a lot of information, and I'm believing this is with a complex subject, should you use a simple deck and then perhaps send a more detailed handout to the audience for them to view? So Tom, I'll get your comments, and then Jim.
Okay, and it's really a great question because we want to communicate our message, but we also want to make sure people have some kind of a follow-through so that they can view detail later. But if we are practicing what I'm teaching and what I've learned from Patricia and what we've practiced for years, that is to keep our slides simple. If it takes more than 4 or 5 seconds to read what's on a slide, then it's too much, it's too long, in which case, again, you follow those 3 great options I mentioned. So your first strategy would be to have 2 separate decks. One is simple and one is detailed that has much more information that you would want to communicate. I personally would prefer not to do that. The second option, which is probably my favorite, is to convert your PowerPoint to slide notes. So you have the visual on top and then you have the PowerPoint notes on the bottom. So you convert that to a PDF. Hopefully this is making sense. Just to start over again, convert your PowerPoint to a PDF where you have the slide on top, the notes on the bottom, and then you can just forward that to people afterwards. So you've got the visual along with the information. And then finally is you could just create a document that has all the detail you want and send it by email or transfer it to everyone afterwards. Those are the 3 best options that I know of.
And I'd like to chime in, Patricia. You had shown the Fripp model slide a little bit earlier, with which it can be very complex. But the way the slide was built and the way you present it, you lead the audience to what you're telling them. So if you showed the slide all at one time, it would be blowing them away. But the way you do it, by entering or having things animate a little bit at a time, you can bring the audience through the story. So I think giving them a little short version of that is probably a better way to do something as complex as your Fripp model.
And Jim, when we worked with, I'm thinking of a specific client, they were showing a slide in their client prospecting presentations, and they had so much information, and what you did, you kept every element, but you took them apart. Can you explain that?
Yes. When they first got the slide, it took me about an hour to figure out what the slide was talking about, and you're right, it was very complex between technology and people and their product. And basically, I pulled it apart and realized there was a part that was the people part, there was a part that was the technology part, and I showed those separately, and then we brought those together and then showed their servers in the middle, which is really what the original point was. But when you just looked at the slide, it made absolutely no sense whatsoever. So, and they were very pleased with that.
Perfect. All right, let's see. What is the best way for a grabber that's interesting? Summer wanted to know that because you talk about a grabber, Tom. What are your best grabbers for online?
Well, first of all, we need to think Hollywood, like I was suggesting earlier. And we want just like any great movie is going to get your attention right from the start. They do it visually. There's something interesting and engaging. There's some drama. There's something that gets you. So imagine that you're creating your own motion picture. What would get their interest with your topic? So in our case, it could be a quote, a fact, a statistic, a testimonial, a provocative statement. My favorite is to cite the #1 challenge that our audience is facing. And if we've done our homework, if we've done our discovery process and we've asked the right questions, then we know what that challenge is going to be. And we know what the pain is that's associated with that. And then we can tell a very brief story for how we solved it for someone else. So for instance, if it is a virtual presentation as the topic, the last thing we want to do is put our audience to sleep. And as you know, that was my grabber opening. I might then add, this is exactly the same challenge that Cisco had with their 65,000 employees, which is exactly why they brought us in as their exclusive provider of virtual presentation skills. So that was obviously very off the top of my head, but again, start with a challenge, get them in touch with their pain, and then show how you solved it for someone else. Add an interesting photo or visual or graphic or several that help to tell the story, and you're off to creating a wonderful Hollywood virtual presentation.
Good. Perfect. And all these techniques work the same with an in-person presentation. So perhaps you have to think for the 31% who aren't experienced, take many of the best principles that makes you a good speaker and review Tom's notes and see a lot of what you now know you can apply to the virtual presentation. Now, if you were comfortable with a platform, this comes from Jim, would you be able to handle a video as part of that? Tom, how often do you play videos within your PowerPoint when you're presenting online?
I would say almost never. And as much as I love the technology, it's just not consistent. It's not stable. I will never forget the first time that I was presenting to a large audience. It was literally at WebEx headquarters, and they had this wonderful room set up with 10 different computers all over the place. And we logged in. We had several hundred participants, and they went to turn on the video, and it literally kicked everyone out of the meeting. Now, this is from WebEx, from their headquarters. I've experienced similar challenges in the past where I just don't want to take the risk. So if I have a large audience, I'll send them a link to a video if I need to. Now, that said, I do oftentimes play video when I'm delivering my training programs for smaller groups because there's seems to be less of a challenge there. But bandwidth is always going to be an issue. The live web camera, which we're doing right now, is different from the recorded video. I'm more comfortable doing the live video than I am the recorded.
And Tom, perhaps you need to talk about this, because we are doing more and more of these virtual meetings, and so we got, and Terry recommended this, we have cable in, we have new lines so that we have more power. And so if the presenter has great power and all the bells and whistles to have the best quality, surely the experience for the audience depends on how much bandwidth they have.
That's correct. So that's what I know. Now, I'll use Cisco as an example because I literally have delivered over 240 virtual training programs for their employees. And these are people that are scattered all over the globe. Almost without fail, I can tell who has a wireless connection. So if there's someone in Shanghai that has a wireless connection, we'll play the video and I'll ask everybody, please raise your hand if you could see the video. That one person does not raise their hand, and I'll say, are you on a wireless connection? And the answer is yes. So we just don't have control over our audience. We have to shoot for, what's the best term, the lowest common denominator, where we all have the same speed. And I'd rather not distract people with a video that doesn't play.
All right. And we would certainly welcome any of you who are live. We know a lot of our friends will watch this as a replay. If you have questions. So, Paul, can you look down and see if we have any specific questions that people have sent in already?
Absolutely. Most of them have been addressed. There was a question about what camera we were using, and Terry and Tom both answered that when it was the Logitech C920. And there were a few questions about someone wanted the link to Tom's program, which is going to, of course, be shared at the end of the call for his webinar. And just so mainly those questions have been handled. Another question was from Cynthia. She asked more of these meetings because she really enjoyed it.
Well, Cynthia is a very loyal participant to all our events, and yes, these will be ongoing. Tom's Making Minutes is tomorrow, and I'll be delivering another on powerful persuasive presentations next week. You might, depending on what mail list you're on, you might have already heard about that, but Cynthia, we promise we will be ongoing. Now, let me look and see if we have any here. We do have one question about the different pricing for different programs, whether it's Webinar Jam, whether it is WebEx or GoToMeeting. Perhaps you'd like to address that, Tom, while I look down at the rest of the questions from last time.
Absolutely, and I would also encourage Paul to jump in because you'll know about pricing for Webinar Jam. For me, WebEx, I use WebEx to present up to 25 people, not for more. The pricing for me becomes, it's too steep after 25 people, and it's somewhere around $65 a month. For GoToWebinar, I use that primarily to present to groups that are 25 or larger, up to 1,000. Now, because I've had this account for probably 7 or 8 years, I'm grandfathered into a really, really great deal. So for $100 a month, I can present to up to 1,000 people, unlimited. I think for the normal person nowadays, it's probably somewhere between 100 and 200 for a similar option. I don't think you can present to up to 1,000, but maybe 250 or 500. But it still seems like a great option for me. Paul, your thoughts?
Well, personally, I really do enjoy Webinar Jam because of the ease of use and how it automatically uploads to YouTube. The cost involved is $297 per year, so it's very competitive compared to the other platforms. GoToWebinar and WebEx do have a few more specific tools that are geared toward business presentations that can be used, but for me, Webinar Jam, as far as the cost involved and the automation of everything, is the way that we'd like to go so far.
And one comment I would make, if you're doing Webinar Jam, and with the Google Meetings and the registration is with Webinar Jam, you do need to have a moderator. And I I cannot tell you how many times, because it can be stressful. I don't know how Tom does this by himself. It's nice to have Paul as a very calm presence when I'm getting a little nervous, and you need two of you to remember how to do something. So just like, for example, would you like to explain white lining, Paul, because I had to ask Terry Brock, can you remind me how to do this? So can you describe that for our listeners?
Absolutely. During a meeting with Google Hangouts, anytime someone speaks, their video automatically pops up to the center of the screen. What whitelining does is the super admin or moderator, which is myself, I can go and click specifically on who's being broadcast to the recording, the participants, so that way any background noise or if someone coughs, it doesn't actually put them at the forefront of the screen. It's just whoever the moderator is whitelining. So it's really helpful to a presenter not to have to worry about that. You can focus on presenting rather than worrying about who's up on the screen.
Good. I did notice that somebody wanted to know, this is Jim, wants to know, is this, do I have a green screen behind me? No, I actually don't. The back of my office is shelves, same as yours. This is a photograph that was taken by my assistant, Harold Hingle, and printed on a board, Kinko's. So we put it in, and I have clutter. Believe it, yes, I have clutter, but we push it out the way, and you can see my Cavett statue pointing into the future. And here's another question. So let's actually ask them a question. How do you get them to ask questions and participate? So we're going to ask you a question, very simple. Let's go to a poll. And how about something very simple? Is this information helpful? Yes or no? And you'll have a minute to do that. And while everyone is looking at their poll for yes and no, if this information helpful, Tom, what you did in our last meeting, we had dozens of questions and you had people actively engaged. Can you talk about that?
If I remember correctly what you're referring to, there are a few strategies that I've become really fond of to interact with audiences, and maybe my favorite, and I'll be using this tomorrow in the webinar that I'm delivering using GoToWebinar, it's to ask an open-ended question and then have people type their response into the chat room. So I've done this with groups of 3, I've done it with groups of 1,000. And you'll see this a steady flow of responses come in, and then all you have to do is just read 6 or 8 or 10 of them back, and it's kind of like you're having a conversation with the audience. It also gives you an opportunity to elaborate on any of those comments if you wish. So if I were to say, what's your #1 challenge when you're presenting online, someone might say background noise. Then it would be an opportunity for me to say, okay, so there's several different kinds of muting features that you can access, and so on. So that's my favorite way to interact with an audience. Second would be very simple, is using the raise your hand feature, which many platforms do provide, and to just ask a question, have people raise their hands, and then if someone does not raise their hand for whatever reason, it gives you an excuse to call on them. John, I noticed that your hand isn't up. Was there a reason for that, or is there's another opinion that you have, right? I'll share one more strategy, and this is when I was working with WebEx. 10 years ago, they hired me to train their entire sales and marketing team. And so I interviewed their top salespeople, and the #1 salesperson out of 400 people, I asked him, Jerry, what is your best strategy to engage your audience? And he said, Tom, it's very simple. I address people by their first name. And if I do this in the very beginning, then everyone else is likely to sit back and say, oh gosh, I better pay attention because he might be calling on me too. So it's a little bit of a trick, but it actually works. It genuinely works. The catch there is that you need to ask a legitimate, relevant question. Otherwise, it's just hot air. So those are 3 strategies that I like to use.
And may I, as the speech coach in the crowd, suggest, Tom, that it really isn't a trick, it's a technique.
It's a technique, thank you.
Developing rapport with an audience, you don't want to trick them. Just a thought.
Okay.
And then, so let's see, we don't have results of the polls yet. Is this information valuable? Yes or no? They were obviously hanging on your every word, Tom, and not, oh, yes. Good. Well, 85% said it is helpful, 15% said no. So if you don't think this is valuable, and we appreciate that your honesty, would you go to the chat and ask us a specific question that would make it valuable? And certainly Paul will read that to us. Would you recommend Toastmasters versus a professional speech coach? And I would recommend both, because the price, the investment for you is so different. Toastmasters is a great place to rehearse on a regular basis and practice in a safe environment. And certainly, and I know, Tom, you went to Toastmasters for years. I'm not sure if Jim has. Any comments?
I started out at Toastmasters myself.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Good. Tom?
Yeah, my comment is that Toastmasters is a fantastic place to practice the skills that you learn in a professional environment. So whether it's learning from Patricia in Fripp VT or a live workshop, whether it's a 1 or 2 day program, that's a great place to learn the skills and then go practice them for 10 years, which is what I did.
Okay, perfect. All right, good. Do you practice your presentation with a focus group before you formally present?
I'm not sure exactly what is a focus group, but I will definitely do a dry run or a rehearsal, especially if I'm presenting with a partner. If I'm not presenting with a partner, then I will log in a second computer as a participant, and I will walk through the presentation. If I'm familiar with it, I'll do it for 10 minutes. If I'm not, then I'll do it until I'm familiar with it, and that may be 3, 4, 5 times. It could be 6 hours. The key is just to feel ready and confident.
Yeah, even though we might be presenting multiple programs every week. Now, I've been in Europe for the last 2.5 weeks, so I haven't delivered an event for 3 weeks. So it's very easy to get rusty fast. Paul and I rehearse everything. As you heard, with Tom and Jim, we rehearsed a couple of times before we tuned in early today. Another question, and this came from Stephanie, and I'd like to hear from both Tom, then Jim. Do you recommend a teleprompter?
I personally have only used a teleprompter presenting in person, and that's usually in front of a large group where you see the screen down below. I would love a teleprompter. However, it's very similar to seeing your PowerPoint notes when you're in WebEx or having them on a second screen. I would just rather be familiar with my material than have a teleprompter.
And my comment on that, Patricia, is I'm just so afraid that people would get so dependent on the teleprompter that they wouldn't be communicating with the audience and connecting. And that, I think, is the biggest issue on these webinars and when we're in person, is connecting with the audience and keeping their attention.
Better to be personable than perfect, hashtag FrippVT. Remind you again. Now, one of the questions, of course, was over 1,000 people you heard Google Plus, Hangouts for Webinar Jam. That's great. What is the difference between a webinar and a webcast? I think we might have answered that last time. What was your answer, Tom?
I may not be able to describe it as well as others, but for me, I believe a webinar is where you're presenting to a group of people where it's a little more interactive, and it feels like a webcast is almost more of a TV show. It's like where you're presenting out to large groups out there. If anyone in our audience has a better answer, I would love to hear it. I'm looking at our attendee list, and I recognize a couple people, but there may be some experts in here. Roger, is that just curiosity? Is that Roger Corville? If so, then I would love to have you answer.
And so he can't answer it live, but he can write in the chat room. Certainly, yep. Write it, definitely. And Paul, do we have any specific questions?
Yes, there's a few questions. I've answered them directly to the people, but I thought it might be helpful to answer them here as well. Can you display the results of a polls in a graph within Webinar Jam? There is that function. We decided to announce the results live over the air. Ms. Fripp does, so it's a little more engaging, but you can broadcast those results to other people in Webinar Jam. Is there a raise your hand feature on Webinar Jam? There isn't. You can use the chat box or the questions box as kind of a raise your hand type feature. There's a lot of things that you can do. You can choose to broadcast the chat window. Someone asked that the chat isn't open to the public where everyone can see each other's comments. It's just a preference. If you want everyone to be able to see them, a lot of the times we use the chat box as direct questions to us that we can answer directly to people, and maybe not something that is going to be broadcast to everyone. And then Terry also mentioned that, Terry Brock, that Google Plus Hangouts is actually the platform that we're using, and Webinar Jam is more of an added feature. That's why it's a little bit lower on cost, because it's basically, I believe that is all the questions that we have so far that have been covered.
All right, perfect. Well, then we certainly honor your time, and as Tom says, you don't want to drag anything out too long in the virtual the virtual environment. So, Paul, would you like to let people know we have two upcoming events? The one with Tom's, and I have one coming up in next week, November the 5th. So I believe what we decided to do, Paul, we will make sure when we send the replay, we'll send them information on November the 9th, November the 5th, and we will leave them with Tom. What works is it's tomorrow. Then what I would like to do is talk about a special event coming up. I'll just share my screen with a PowerPoint. Then I will ask for the walkaway lines from Jim and Tom, and we can show you the Making Minutes link. So let's see, we are going to go share my screen. Can you see there? All learning needs repetition and reinforcement. Hashtag FrippVT, of course. This is a Fripp VT user meeting where we invited a few of our friends. Most of our VT user meetings are closed for our members. This is a highly interactive platform. If you are not a member, we recommend that you go take a free trial. The first steps to persuade, influence, and inspire is Fripp VT. Highly interactive, learn at your own pace, virtual training. It's almost like having Fripp as your virtual speech coach, and then you can certainly ask me questions in our VT user meetings. There is a special event coming up February the 28th and the 1st of the March, which is Lady and the Champs. And for our friends who are too far away, another country, or don't want to get on planes, we will be streaming live. The important part to mention this now, if you go to ladyandthechamps.conference.com, the price for in-person attendance does go up after October the 31st. So go to Lady and the Champs Conference and check that out. I will now stop sharing my screen. Let's see here and come back to my webinar. Can you now see me, Paul?
Absolutely.
Good, wonderful. So, Paul, would you like to show them we're making minutes for Tom? And Jim, what are your concluding remarks about life, business, or use with PowerPoint?
May your next presentation be your best.
Great. Tom?
The number one strategy to engage any audience is to present as much value as possible based on their specific needs.
Perfect. And Paul, have we got the making minutes? link up or?
Absolutely. Everyone should be able to see on the right-hand side of their screen, there's a Sign Up Today button that will open in a new tab where you can sign up for the Making Minutes webinar tomorrow.
Perfect. And thank you very much for your attendance. Thank you very much for viewing this as a replay. Remember, all learning needs repetition and reinforcement, and Fripp VT is your perfect tool to do that. Thank you for spending your time with us.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you all.